Hello, everyone. Let's see if we can get the view going here. My name is Aaron Carlson. I'm the Executive Director of the Friends of CAIC. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you for being members of the Friends of CAIC and supporting everything that we do for avalanche safety and education here in Colorado. Tonight, we have our regional snowpack update. This will be a talk from Ethan Greene, the director of the CAIC. We'll also have Bex Hodgetts give us an update on the Southern Mountain conditions. Brian Lazar will give us an update on the Northern or the Central Mountain conditions. And Mike Cooperstein will give us an update on the Northern Mountain conditions. We will take questions at the end. You can either send those to us through the Q&A or the chat, or you can also raise your hand and we'd be happy to unmute you and let you ask that question directly to any one of these folks. With that, I also want to thank our sponsors. This event is presented by Dynafit, Osprey, Colorado Mountain School, Colorado Adventure Guides, Pomoka, Black Diamond, Backcountry Access, and Climax Molybdenum. We also have several supporting sponsors of the event. We couldn't host events like this without our sponsors and without all of our members. So thank you so much for being here. With that, I'll turn it over to Ethan. Ethan, I think you are ready to go. So have at it.
Thanks, Aaron. Can you guys, Aaron, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the regional snowpack update slide in blue there?
I can see you and the regional snowpack update.
It's amazing. It's almost like we planned it this way. Well, thanks for the introduction and thanks everybody for joining us tonight. I'm just going to give kind of a quick overview of what's happened over the last couple of months and the start of our season, and then I'm going to turn it over to Bex and Brian and Coop, who are really going to go into the details of what's going on in each one of their regions. So this year's avalanche season has not disappointed. It's been a pretty interesting time and certainly you know, significantly different and some really interesting aspects to it that differentiates it from the last few years, which have also not been terribly dull years. So what's been happening over this fall is that we had a fairly dry period in kind of the mid of November and into December. And that set us up for a very interesting time when we started to get snow, and the snow came in pretty rapidly between Christmas and New Year's, and produced a really interesting avalanche cycle and sent us into January, which is almost a different world than what we saw kind of into the fall. We are sort of on track for what we would see in terms of human involvements for this time of year, which is again kind of interesting given the type of avalanche year that we've had. And I think kind of the big take home from that is that we're kind of on track for the normal involvements, which is not necessarily a good thing because we're looking at around 95 involvements over the year with 6 deaths, and we're only halfway through the winter. So the ability for us to get back or stick on that track, which involves 3 more people dying this year, is certainly within the cards. And as we saw last year, certainly we could see things that are quite a bit different. But anyways, Bex and Coop and Brian are gonna cover that in more depth. So this is the snow water equivalent statewide. This top blue line there is the maximum over the 30-year record that we typically look at as normal. The green line is the median, 30-year median, so what we would call the normal curve. And then the red line is the minimum that we've observed during that period. This all comes from the NRCS, from the USDA. And then this black line is this year, right over here. And you can see we are sort of going back and forth between what we would call normal, which may really be more of what the new normal is. Early in the winter, at the beginning of the year, November 1st, when we started actually issuing daily forecasts, we were pretty close to what that normal is. And then we deviated from that pretty dramatically. When we got into the 1st of November, we were all right around that normal time frame or normal SWE values, right around 100% around the state. When we are in that early part of the year and the snowpack is fairly shallow, again, kind of small differences can make a pretty big difference when we're looking at what that normal value is. By the time we got to December 1st, things were really different. It was very dry, and we were in the middle of a pretty significant drought. A lot of places actually were snow-free at this point. And then we went into this period around Christmas and New Year's, which I imagine everybody on this call is quite familiar with, because it was pretty dramatic. And you can see that we rose from being quite below the normal value to quite above it. And that produced some pretty interesting avalanche activity, which the other folks will cover. And then by the time we got to January 1st to New Year's, we were sitting in a pretty nice place, really well above normal throughout most of the state. Not all of the drainages, but many of them. And this is where we are today. We've since that storm period ended, it has again been fairly dry. We continue to have some small snow accumulations, but January has been a relatively dry month in lots of the state. We are maintaining sort of near to above average in most drainages, with the Arkansas and the Upper Rio Grande being below average still. And as far as human triggered avalanches, we had fairly little snow early in November, and very few human involvements. And then as the snow started to come in, we started to see a lot of involvements fairly quickly. Sort of like last year, these were mostly small avalanches, but then as we got into that heavy snowfall period between Christmas and New Year's, that changed pretty dramatically. We did have 2 fatal accidents so far this year. The first one was very early in that stormy period on Christmas Eve at Diamond Peaks, where 2 skiers were touring. One of them was caught, buried, and killed in a fairly small avalanche. You can see it outlined, or the slope outlined in red on that right panel. This was during a period of an avalanche warning, but the avalanche danger was actually rated at considerable below tree line where this avalanche occurred. And then the next one happened really after that very stormy period, but at a time when we were still seeing fairly large avalanches, and unfortunately remote triggered avalanches, so avalanches that you could trigger without standing on the slope itself. And 2 snowshoers and a dog were caught, buried, and killed in this relatively small in size, in spatial, in width, but very deep, up to 10 feet deep. The avalanche that this broke. They were off of Hoosier Pass and following those red arrows along a summer road, and kind of wandered a little bit off track and underneath this steep slope, and remotely triggered this avalanche. So like I mentioned before, this does put us sort of on track for our 10-year average of human involvements, which is right around 95 or so involvements over the year, with 6 people that die. Right now we're sitting at 25 people caught in avalanches for the year. We've had 2 fatal accidents with 3 people killed. And of course, it is just at the end of January. So unfortunately, we still have plenty of time to hit those 10-year numbers. And I certainly hope that we will remain below that, but there's a lot of winter left in some of the most dangerous months. So the odds are not in our favor. So with that, I am going to turn this over to Rebecca Hodgetts, who's the lead forecaster for the Southern Mountain region, and she is going to go into more detail into what is happening in the Southern Mountains. Bex, it's all you.
Awesome. Share my screen.
Bex, can you start
Yeah.
your video too, please?
It said I can't.
There you
How's
are.
that? Love
Perfect.
it. Okay, and the screen. Sweet. Can you see it?
No.
Really? That sucks. What can you see?
You.
Share screen. This screen. Share it. How about now?
There we go.
Great. How about now?
Perfect.
Sweet. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the intro, Ethan. I'm Bex down here in the Southern Mountains, and we may not have paid our heat bill at the Silverton office because it's freezing in here, and that's where I've got my coffee on. But hi, nice to meet you all. I have the privilege of being the lead forecaster down here. As you can see from my map here, anyone who's not familiar with the Southern Mountains, they're generally anything south of Highway 50 in Colorado. So we've split it into 3 zones. The eastern zone is the Sangre de Cristos. Then we have the north and south San Juan. And they're about 10,000 square miles, and we have 7 forecasters that get to work here. And just to recap, the south has been seeing a little bit of a different winter from up north. So we're kind of quite a bit drier, as you saw from Ethan's maps. And over here, South Colony, that is in the Sangre de Cristos, and that's really doing well compared to the rest of the Sangres, unfortunately. So there's some areas there that are 30% average. Moving west, you see by Cochetope there, and the Lagaritas, they're also very far below average. Slumgullion, it's close to Lake City. So you move over into kind of the central San Juans, and also pretty dry here. Wolf Creek's flying a pretty fat flag. They did really well. The Southern Mountains, the Southern San Juan, I'm sorry, did really well in the Christmas storms, and I'll touch on that in a minute. But Wolf Creek Pass is 124, and actually way down at the bottom here is Cumbres La Manga, and they're doing very well as well. Over to Telluride and Red Mountain Pass, they're sitting at or a little bit below average, and then Lizard Head, the La Platas, and Moelis and Coalbank are all keeping us right around average there, but pretty dry. We've had a dry start, then a very snowy Christmas period, and then January for us, we haven't quite seen what the northern and central have seen as far as consistent smaller storms. So it's a little bit grim. And because of that, I don't have a whole lot to talk about. So I'm going to talk about the Christmas storm a little bit and just highlight 2 areas that did pretty well. I copied here the danger ratings. So H is for high, C is for considerable, and M is for moderate. So that's level 4 of 5, 3 of 5, and 2 of 5 on the danger scale, and through the Christmas period. So from Christmas Eve through to the 6th, when the hazard started trending down here. And as you can see, we kind of had a number of little periods of, a number of periods where the hazard was high, and we were seeing some pretty significant and widespread natural activity. Wolf Creek Pass during that time measured, the snow tail there was at 12.8 inches of water and 114 inches of snow. So a super snowy period for Wolf Creek Pass. Anecdotally, CDOT says, their record was 8 feet in 8 days, and I think Matt recorded 9.4 feet in 12 days. So again, super snowy. These pictures here are from Wolf Creek Pass Highway Avalanche Path. It's called Alberta's Cousin. It runs over a snow shed. This is from a mitigated control route on the 1st, so January 1st, New Year's Day. There was a D3, pretty large slide, obviously. You can see the crown in the top left-hand picture there. Then the snow running over the snow shed, and at the bottom there is kind of I drew a red line where the crown is. And this highlights what the problem was through that period. So we had the dry start to the season that Ethan described, and the northerlies held on to some snow. There wasn't a whole lot, but it was cold and faceted. And when we talk about faceted, that's a very weak snow crystal type. And then we had these huge wet slabs come down, or not wet slabs as in an avalanche type, but the snow came in very wet. And so there were dense slabs and cohesive. And that tends to create this persistent slab problem. And the characteristic of persistent slabs is that they break widely across multiple terrain features. So this avalanche here really illustrates the persistent slab problem and how far these avalanches were propagating during that time. So here's a couple more pictures of persistent slabs that we saw during that period in the Southern San Juan. The photo on the left there, I wanted to show you this. This is from Graysill Mountain to the west of Purgatory. And you can see it stepped all the way down to the ground there. So it ripped out that whole basal facet layer with the Christmas storm snow and shows the dirt there down below. The one on the upper right-hand side, that's from Gibbs Creek near Wolf Creek Pass. And you can see, we saw kind of these two types of persistent avalanches. So they were either running on the very top of that basal facet layer, or they were stepping all the way to the ground. So that one in Gibbs Creek there ran on the top of the basal facets. And then at the bottom there, that's west of Creed, which is right on the boundary of the North and South San Juan. And you can see the dirt stain there where it ran to ground. So big slides, they weren't as big as we're been used to seeing because we didn't have much of a snowpack prior to the storm. So the largest slides we saw around this area were in the D3 category. And here's a quick summary of the avalanches. This is from the Avalanche Explorer tool, which you can find on the CAIC website. And there's a video actually attached to it. So if you're curious and want to explore it, just hit the question mark there at the top of the map, and it'll send you to some links where you can really play with this tool. It's really fun. But in the South San Juans during that period, we had 39 recorded avalanches. Not quite as many observers in the South San Juan, so this is just what people reported to us. And most of them were on the northerly aspects, which you can see there, where were the only places that were still holding snow after the very, very dry November. And then the other place that I wanted to highlight was Coalbank Pass. So this is also in the South San Juan, closer to the North San Juan border though. Coalbank had some interesting statistics I thought you guys might enjoy. So sort of. So November was the driest November that the highway forecasters here for the CAIC have reported since 1992, have recorded, with just 8 inches of snow recorded on Coalbank Pass for November. And then we went into that December storm cycle, and it bumped us up to the second snowiest December on Coalbank. So close to 2 record months in a row there. 8.55 inches of water, which for a continental snowpack is a lot of snow in a short period of time, and almost 100 inches of snow. So pretty interesting for Coalbank. Again, I copied over, that's the same danger distribution graph at the top there. And then also notable mention, Cumbres and La Manga, those passes very close to the New Mexico border, also measured 12 inches of water at their snow tell. That was completely bare ground prior to the Christmas storm. So again, really impressive totals. And so here's the same Avalanche Explorer for the North San Juan during that period. We had 61 avalanches reported to the center during that period. Again, a lot more observers in that area, so we tend to see a higher number of avalanches reported. And then on the avalanche rows there, most human and natural triggered avalanches were on northerlies. The west and east and southwest, most were explosives triggered from operations. So then after this period ended, we kind of went into the doldrums in the Southern Mountains. We did have some super fun windy periods. And the wind blew from almost every direction as well. So it persisted through the 16th. We kept the persistent slab problem, persisted through the 16th of the month, because we kept seeing these pesky little, well, they're not even little, these pesky large persistent slab avalanches triggered remotely by people traveling in the backcountry. Not a whole lot of them, but enough to keep the forecasters worried that we hadn't seen the end of the problem. So around the 16th to 18th, we dropped everything to low, and have been in the happy state of no problems, avalanche problems, we should say, up until now. So everybody is low in the Southern Mountains with no problems. Ta-da! Anyway, so current conditions, pretty good summary right there. Here I have a kind of a potpourri of what we think our next problems are going to be. Looking downstream to the weather that we're expecting, looks like we would love to see a giant weather pattern change, but it looks like we're going to get some smaller storms come through. So mostly we're concerned with surface instabilities, and I've got kind of a cross-section of surfaces for you. That first one on the upper left-hand side is actually a southwest facing slope, and that the snow saw there is a perk. It's kind of bringing a perk column to your attention. So that's saying that we've had some water melting at the surface and moving through the snowpack on our southerly facing slopes. And anyone who's been out and about below tree line in the southern the southern mountains on southern slopes will know that the dirt layer is really showing through. We've got lots of bare patches showing up, and it looks like spring. Especially below tree line. As you move up in elevation, we just tend to have a melt freeze crust where the snow surface melts during the day and then freezes overnight when the temperatures drop. So southern slopes are, I've heard the word bulletproof thrown around. They're slick, to say the least, and southern sun crusts or melt freeze crusts are up to 4 inches thick. So we'd say 2 to 10 centimeters of refrozen snow on southerlies right now. And then the next one in the middle there with the snow store is from a westerly aspect, but it actually is quite closely related to the easterlies. So we're having this concerning problem pop up of multiple crust facet layers, where we have weak snow developing sandwiched in between these crusts, and that is a pretty notorious weak layer for future snow loads. So we'll be watching those snow surfaces when we start to get snow again in February. The far right there is a northerly aspect, only 1 meter deep. So the majority of our zone, I would say at a guess, 60% or more has less than 1.5 meters of snow. So or out areas, the southern mountains. So we again are not a very thick snowpack, except around the Wolf Creek and the western side of the southern San Juan. Otherwise, the pesky basal weak layers are really within the realm of human or machine triggering avalanches still if we continue to get a load. Right now, very unreactive in snowpack tests, and we haven't had any reported avalanches barring a few loose dry sloughs in the last week. So dormant for the time being, but we haven't taken it off of our back of our mind list for sure. The gloved hand is showing you a southerly melt freeze crust for your pleasure. And then the final picture there, it actually looks a lot better than it is, but that's the alpine, and it has really, really been beat down by these variable winds. So we have really hard wind pressed slabs. There's not a lot of soft snow to be found. Most of the soft snow that you can find in the southern mountains right now are in wind sheltered and northerly facing terrain. And that is what we call, for skiers anyway, recycled powder. So it's quite soft on the surface right now, kind of fun where you can find it. However, that surface, or at least top 10 to 20 centimeters of snow, is rapidly losing strength as the facets grow with these big diurnal swings. So we've got another weak layer to consider on northerlies when we start to see a slab build. But yeah, kind of not super grim in the south, but yeah, we're hoping for a snowy February. So thanks, guys.
Thanks, Bex. Really selling it.
Sorry.
All right, Brian, you're up.
All right. Sorry, I lost my video here. One sec, I'm going to switch screens because yeah. What are you seeing right now, Aaron?
I see the Google Slides.
Okay, you do. Great.
Yeah, if you could just hit the slideshow button, you'd be great. There you go.
Okay, excellent. All right, so I am here in Carbondale. We're in the Central Mountains, and the western portion of the Central Mountains. So essentially, kind of everything from the western half of the Aspen Zone, the Crystal River Valley, western part of the Gunnison Zone. So all the stuff west of Crested Butte into the Ruby Range and Anthracites, and even the Grand Mesa. Has been and continues to be some of the deepest and snowiest parts of the state. And that trend started quite early in the season, as early as even October. We do have some shallower areas, but they're still doing pretty good. So even up around Fremont and the east side of Independence Pass, we're near those 30-year normals that Ethan was talking about. Just to give you a current snapshot of where we're at from kind of west to east, you can see from Grand Mesa through Schofield Pass, through Brumley on the east side of Independence Pass, and even up to Fremont, we are right at average or as much as 155% of average out on the Grand Mesa. And for a place like Schofield Pass, which is one of the snowiest spots in the state, that's a lot of snow. So this is boding well for us. You can see most of the Central Mountains are sitting at Greene. So this is well over 100%, even as far down south as Monarch and Porphyry Snowtell site. So we started to see avalanche activity a little bit earlier in the season than some of the other places, just because we had a bit more snow. As Ethan mentioned, we did get early October snow. Our dry spell in November this year was markedly different than last year's November dry spell, which is pretty cold. We had more snow stick around last November. This November was actually quite warm enough that it melted snow off of everything except for high elevation northerly aspects. And even in there, we started to see some kind of loose, wet avalanche activity in late October and early November. So these are kind of the first documented avalanches we saw, which are generally of a loose variety. And again, some of those were even wet because our dry spell was quite warm, which helped us in the long run, because those basal facets, which we see every year, were nearly as bad as they were like last year, for example. They weren't as well distributed across the terrain, and where they persisted, they weren't as well developed. It wasn't like giant chains of depth hoar like what we saw last year. And so when you look at kind of those early season doldrums, October 1st through November 19th, we did have enough snow to produce avalanches here in the Central Mountains. You can see most of those avalanches were in these western portions of the Aspen and Gunnison zone. We did record 49 avalanches, but only 11 of those were D2 or big enough to bury or kill a person. And all but 5 of those ran naturally. So these are mostly sloughs, almost entirely sloughs. And you can see from the avalanche rows that these were largely confined to kind of northeast aspects above tree line, because that held the snow, with a spattering of avalanches on easterly slopes. And again, mostly in the alpine, because everything pretty much ran dry. And so here's Jason and one of our forecasters on Mount Arkansas near Leadville on November 11th. Again, here was kind of the situation for us in the Central Mountains in early November. We had a little bit of new snow, and then this is the early season snow. So here's your October snow, and then these are the faceted crystals that formed in late October and early November. And let me make sure I've shared my sound here. I have, and I'll show Jason's quick little compression test on a very thin snowpack, but you can see we had a very delicate snowpack. We were still sitting at low danger, like Ethan and Bex mentioned, early in the season, because we just didn't have much snow. Like, even to find places where you could dig were in heavily wind drifted spots. So it's very easy to avoid avalanches if you wanted. It was that classic early season situation where the most dangerous slopes were also the most attractive for riding, because you couldn't slide around or ride a machine anywhere else because there just wasn't enough snow. So this was, we went out to Highlands Ridge outside of Aspen ski area on November 15th. And I was hoping to get up really high and go out the ridge to even just find some places to dig. And it was too dry, still as November 15th, even above 12,000 feet. So we ducked back down into the trees inside the ski area, which was not open at this point. And this gives you a really good snapshot of what current conditions look like in those fairly isolated wind drifted areas we were warning about in mid-November.
So we're at a near tree line slope, 11,800 feet. So we're at a near tree line slope, 11,800 feet on a northeast facing slope. We've got about 60 centimeter snowpack here in a relatively well protected area. We do have 2 layers of buried facets that we're curious about. One is a layer of near surface facets about 20 centimeters down underneath the most recent storm snow. And we have some slightly larger but rounding facets which make up about the bottom 20 centimeters of the snowpack. Let's see what we get here.
Collapse. One before it.
Whole block.
Yeah.
So you can see we got a failure on the first layer near surface facets, but the slab above it broke and did not communicate the failure across the column. Looks like we did get a failure at the top of the basal facets, which are notably not depth work, and showing some signs of strengthening. You can see it took fairly heavy force to get that thing to break. But we'll see if it came. Yeah. So it did break across the whole column. So if you find one of these wind drifted pockets with a stiff enough wind drifted slab to communicate the failure, you're looking at an avalanche around 1.5 feet thick, which in the wrong piece of terrain could certainly ruin your day, or worse. This interface is probably going to be a problem for us for a little while just because of the nature of the facets. 3 millimeters in size, so although they're gaining some strength, they're not going to go away anytime soon. So our best bet for better stability is to bury this stuff as fast as we can and deep as we can.
Okay, so we didn't bury those quickly. We ended up burying them very deeply. It didn't happen as quick as I would have wanted. It didn't come till the Christmas storm, but we did end up burying those things pretty deeply, and that has been our saving grace, really, in Central Mountains, and allowed us to go to low danger. We finally did, about 5 days after that video was shot, picked up a reasonable snowstorm. It was about 6 to 8 inches across the Southern Mountains with some drifting snow, and because you could see how weak and shallow that snowpack was, we saw some avalanche activity, which was not a surprise. This picture on the left here is Mount Baldy, outside of Crested Butte on a northwest slope. This is right on the border between Aspen and Gunnison. The border runs right through Mount Baldy, so this is actually in the Aspen zone, but this is kind of our first incident and involvement of the season. You can see this thing had been tracked quite quite a bit, because there was not a lot of slopes you could ride still at November 20th. So this is one of those snowiest spots in the state, early season snow. This had, I don't even know, 100 tracks on it. And then we had an incident here with a burial in this little hole. And you can see the kind of avalanches we were dealing with, which were slow and entraining a lot of surface facets. This middle picture is an avalanche that was remotely triggered by a group of skiers on Chicago Ridge from about 15 feet away. You can see the skier in the middle of the avalanche path just for scale here. And then one in the Ruby Range, and you can see the crown breaking here. This is, I think, our first size 2 avalanche of the season in the Central Mountains, just on November 24th. So just a little bit of snow was leading to a little bit of, quite a pronounced avalanche cycle in the deep parts of this west Central Mountains, which is the western side, because that was the only place that had enough snow to produce avalanches. So the beginning of December was pretty quiet. It was a dry spell across the state, but we finally got a pretty good snowstorm. This thing was not the Christmas storm, but it was definitely enough to get everyone's attention. We went into warnings in Aspen and Gunnison on December 9th and 10th. You can see the snow totals here, and these are not trivial 2-day storm totals. We're looking at 30 inches out on the Grand Mesa, which really didn't do much to the danger in Grand Mesa because of its low elevation and really rocky terrain feature characteristics. 30 inches was just enough to start obscuring the ground cover. However, in those snowier parts of the Central Mountains, like Schofield Pass, so essentially the McClure Pass to the Anthracites, picked up just shy of 2 feet. Highlands up in the upper Roaring Fork picked up 14 inches. And this led to another pronounced avalanche cycle again. So we saw 304 avalanches in this 3-day period between December 8th and 11th. And we saw our first size 3 or D3 avalanche of the season out of this cycle. And of course, it was in the snowy part of the Central Mountains because that was the only place that had enough volume to produce avalanches that big. So here we can see what came out of it. So this one was near Crested Butte off Schuylkill Ridge. This one's off Highlands Ridge. And so you can see we're starting to see soft slabs break and run some pretty good distances. And then here in the Ruby Range, this avalanche actually broke and was the first recorded D3 of the season across the state, not just in the Central Mountains. So then we had the main event, of course, December 23rd through New Year's. The whole state lit up. We were at warnings in 9 out of our 10 zones. We had warnings issued in the Central Mountains, so the Saguache, Aspen, Gunnison, and Grand Mesa zones on the 24th. In this 8-day period between the 24th and January 1st, we had 7 days of avalanche warnings and high danger. So it just kept snowing and dumping. And I will show you some snow totals, which were quite impressive. We had 1 day where lull between big pulses of storms where we were able to drop down to considerable danger on December 29th. And then we went back right into high danger. So this was one of the most prolonged periods of high danger that I can remember. We did hit some historic snow totals. And so on the left here are just snow totals measured December 24th through January 1st at some ski areas in the Central Mountains. You can see even our dry places like Ski Cooper outside of Leadville picked up, approaching 4 feet of snow. The heaviest snow was falling in the Gunnison zone and along that Paradise Divide area, and Crested Butte Mountain Resort picked up 99 inches of snow in that 8-day period. And this is by no means the deepest snow. So like if you look at what we got in terms of snow water equivalent, Schofield was a standout. So Bex was talking about the 12 plus inches at Wolf Creek Pass. Schofield picked up over 14 inches of SWE. This was approaching 14 feet of snow in an 8-day period in the snowiest portions of the Central Mountains. It was quite something. And just for comparison, this graph on the right shows some of the biggest storms that we've recorded at the Schofield Snowtell site since a giant avalanche cycle in 1986. This pink line here is what happened this year. And you can see this very prodigious rise in snow water equivalent, which exceeded the 1986 total. It fell just 0.2 of an inch short of the January 2017 snowpocalypse cycle, which is very much concentrated near and around Crested Butte. This is when Crested Butte had to shut down operations at the ski area just because of too much snow. So we got almost to the 2017 totals, and we did it in 2 less days. It was an impressive amount of snow. And of course, that led to just a massive avalanche cycle. So in those 8-day period, we recorded just shy of 350 avalanches. About a third of those or so were size 3 or bigger. So these are things that are big enough to knock a car off the road, break timber, that kind of thing. We had 12 D4 avalanches. So these are, things that extend historic trim lines. They run from peak to creek, that kind of stuff. We had avalanches run on a variety of aspects, just given the massive snow load, but you can see that the vast majority of those avalanches ran from north to east aspects, and that's because that's where we had the pre-existing snowpack with weak layers near the ground. And so here's just a sampling. This is Ant Peak up in Upper Ewell Creek outside of Marble. So this avalanche actually broke across this ridge. This is the north face. It also took out the east face and the northwest face. So this was a solid D4 avalanche, ran to the creek up the other valley wall. This is taken several days later off the east face of Gothic. This ran to historic lengths, ran into the town of Gothic, and moved some buildings around, which I'll show you. And this is on the Blob, which is right on the Paradise Divide. And this was another D4 avalanche. So this is fairly significant cycle. We were the only place in the state to really see D4 avalanches in the western portions of the Central Mountains, only because we had more volume on the ground before the big Christmas to New Year's loading event. So this is a cabin that was conveniently moved to a different location by Mother Nature up in Bracken Creek. This is just up towards Anthracite Pass. This is, for those of you who know Crested Butte, this is the Judd Falls outhouse, which is at the bottom of the 401 mountain bike trail. Third time that thing has been hit in the last 5 or 7 years. So relocation might be warranted on that one, but you can see that that outhouse is going to need some serious repair. And then this is down in the town of Gothic. This is a newly built house, and you can see that the outhouse was picked up from about 100 yards away and shoved into the cabin itself. So it was an impressive cycle. So we did have another small cycle. We had another small storm after the main event, which coincided with some snowfall around January 6th. So you can see as that snow started around the 5th, it picked up. We had a bunch of avalanche activity between the 6th and the 10th. And then this gradually tapering off. And in some ways, it actually wasn't even gradual. It was pretty dramatic. If you look statewide, the trend is a little bit more gradual. But after the 10th, the loading cycle from around the January 5th and 6th was pretty much done. But we did see some decent avalanche activity there. But this is what led into our period of low danger starting around on the 11th. But we did some good avalanches after the January 6th loading event. Here's a remote trigger from these skiers here, which pulled out this slide. So again, illustrating the persistent slab avalanche nature. And then here was a natural avalanche that pulled out on that same day in Lincoln Creek, which is just on the west side of Independence Pass. So here is our Aspen and Grand Mesa zone forecaster, Dylan, kind of describing conditions near Ashcroft up Castle Creek on January 18th as we're moving into this period of low danger.
Hey everyone, this is Dylan with the Colorado Avalanche Information Center. We're here about 12,000 feet on a northwest facing slope in the Aspen zone. And we're going to do what we call an extended column test here. So we've isolated a 30 by 90 centimeter column from the rest of the snowpack, and we're going to tap on it and test for initiation and propagation of a weak layer within this snowpack here. So we initially get no propagating results here, kind of showing us that it's getting pretty hard to trigger these deeply buried weak layers. But let's just wail on it a few more times and see what happens if you find that weak spot. And so that's the exact kind of avalanche you can trigger today on these kind of slopes. When you do find that area that's a little bit more thin where you can trigger that weak layer deeply buried in the snowpack right now.
So that video does a pretty good job describing most of the Central Mountains at this time. So this is mid-January. This has been the condition over about the last 10 days, 2 weeks, where we had a very low probability early on, but high consequence. So if you brought down that thick, dense mid-pack slab that the holiday storms developed, they were going to be very destructive, but it was very difficult for you as a person to impact those weak layers because they were protected by the very dense and thick mid-pack slab that formed over the holiday season. That was most of the Central Mountains. And so we started to really just start to warn people about these thinner snowpack areas. And those were areas that were about, 4 to 5 feet or shallower in the terrain. In the Central Mountains, that was not many areas. It was really consisting of the eastern side of the Sawatch zone. Most places other than that had a deep enough snowpack where we stopped worrying a little bit about avalanches breaking on weak layers near the bottom of the snowpack. Recently, we've seen enough faceting at the snow surface, and we did get about 5 to 8 inches of snow over the last 6 days or so in the Central Mountains. And so loose snow and drifted snow on top of about 20 to 30 centimeters of near surface facets has created conditions where we've started to see some fairly substantial sloughing. These are just pictures from yesterday. So this left side is on Highlands Ridge. you can see we're being able to pull stuff out, and these are not big slabs breaking, but like loose snow avalanches that are entraining both recent wind drifted snow and the near surface facets. So you've got about a foot of this loose snow on the surface. And so it's running some pretty long distances. It's not much of a concern unless you are in very steep consequential terrain. Getting caught in something like these could knock you off your feet. So we've seen people pushing into very big terrain, rappelling into couloirs, all that kind of stuff. It's low danger. It's very hard to trigger avalanches breaking on deeper weak layers. But you can imagine getting knocked off your feet by something like these avalanches could be very consequential if it takes you off a cliff or something like that. So right now, what we're worried about are very weak surface conditions. So right now, it's kind of about facet slough management until we get a new snow load. As soon as we build a slab on top of the existing weak surface conditions, we will see another avalanche cycle. In the deeper snowpack areas, it's unlikely that many of these step down into deeper weak layers, but we could certainly see avalanches big enough to bury or kill somebody. And so this is the exception to that. So this is up Lincoln Creek. So this is right at the nexus of the Aspen, Gunnison, and Swatch zones. This is about the thinnest spot in the Central Mountains that you can find with about a meter of snow on the ground. And you can see here, we still have a weak 3 millimeter depth hoar at the ground. We are still getting propagating results. And so in these very few areas with really thin snowpack, really in that nexus where Aspen, Gunnison, and Swatch zones meet, right near that essentially the Independence Pass area, we could still trigger avalanches breaking on the basal facets, but that's the only place in the Central Mountains we're really worried about this kind of thing. And Ben and Dylan were up in that area just yesterday, and just before closing time today, produced this video, and it's about 3 minutes long, but Ben does a really good job kind of describing current conditions. And he's right at this nexus, which describes the differences and the different risk management strategies you need to employ depending on snowpack depth across the Central Mountains.
Hey, this is Ben with the CAIC. We're in the southeast Aspen zone, really close to the border of the Gunnison and Swatch zones as well. We're at about 12,300 feet on an east-facing slope above tree line. Last night we picked up about 2 inches of new snow. Here's our latest interface that will become a problem as we build a slab on top. So we have a thin faceted weak layer right here that's only a couple inches down, not yet a problem. We also have a buried layer of facets from around January 9th. So the snowpack here is going to develop some problems in the upper snowpack as we begin to develop slabs through the month of February. When we look at the snowpack overall, the snow height's about 4 feet. And this is shallower than a lot of parts in the Aspen zone. It's one of the shallowest regions within the whole Central Mountains. And as we take a look at the snowpack, we can see the recent January snow. This is our holiday slab. It's quite stiff. And then we've got December 9th snow, and then the stuff that was buried December 9th. And our weak layer right there. Let's see if it performs in an ECT. So no results, not surprising given that we're in low danger. This slab's quite strong. It's supportive where you find it. Not far away from here, you can get into areas where this slab is totally gone and you go right into the weak layer. So if we remove a little of the slab and we keep adding some load, there you see the crack left out into the block, and it fractured through the slab. So these are signs that we don't have a reactive slab weak layer combination at the moment. In this part of the Central Mountains, if we were to get a slab that had several more inches of water, we actually could see things begin to avalanche back down here on these basal weak layers. In most of the Central Mountains, this slab is so thick and strong, we've kind of put these weak layers to bed for now. But here in the shallow parts, Keep your heads up, even though it's low danger. You can see an avalanche right there. Broke on a northerly aspect, broke down near the ground. We've seen several more like that today in this area, and so despite the low danger, stay heads up in steep, shady terrain. Okay, here we are about 70 feet away from our last profile. The snowpack is roughly 2.5 to 3 feet deep in this area, and the slab itself is a little less stiff and it's thinner. Let's see what our results look like here. Here we go, propagating ECT result. Block sliding right on the bottom of our holiday slab. You can see the very large, weak depth hoar at the bottom of the snowpack. This slab is not that easy to trigger, but if you find the wrong spot in the landscape in the shallow parts of the Central Mountains, you can still trigger an avalanche.
So that's a really good summary of what's going on in the Central Mountains for us. As Ben pointed out there, those thin problematic areas are pretty hard to find. That's about as thin as snowpack as you can find in the Central Mountains. In the deepest parts of the Central Mountains, the western portions of the Aspen and Gunnison zone, you will find snowpack depths exceeding 3 meters, as deep as 4 meters right now. So we're not going to see any problems there until we get a bunch of new snow, and that doesn't look like it's going to happen until February. So with that, I will turn it over to Coop to take us a little bit further north and describe conditions up there.
Thanks, Brian. Can you guys hear me?
Perfect, Coop. You're good to go.
Awesome. Great. So we'll finish up with the Northern Mountains and then outlook at the weather that's coming up here over the next couple of weeks. So similar to a lot of the other areas in Colorado, most of the Northern Mountains is getting pretty deep. So especially the Steamboat and Flat Top zone up here to the north, and then about Rocky Mountain Pass to the north is well above median snow water equivalent for the year. There are some thinner areas down here on the kind of southeast part of the Front Range zone going into the kind of Hoosier Pass area, and then obviously extending east into the Sangre de Cristos that Beck showed. The areas in Steamboat and Flat Tops, especially in the Northern Front Range, are really deep, and it's pretty hard to trigger avalanches on the basal faceted layers down there. But there's still some concerns kind of through the central part of the Front Range here, the southern and central part of the Vail and Summit County zone, with persistent slab avalanches and avalanches breaking on the ground. So I'm going to use this graph here to illustrate what's happened in the Northern Mountains this year. So this is from the Vail Mountain Snow Tell. The green line is the median snow water equivalent. The black line is this year. So a couple of things you can see, and we'll step through in October. It was pretty dry until kind of the middle of October. We got a little snowstorm and then went through a dry period again. So we had snow on high elevation, northerly and easterly facing slopes that stuck around for quite a while. It's even still a problem right now. Beginning in November, we got a little bit more snow, and then we went through a bunch of pretty dry periods here where not too much happened into the beginning of December there. And so you can see in this period, we're well below the median until really the end of these Christmas storms that stepped it up. So we're going to look at the month of November real quick. And I won't spend a ton of time on this, but I'll step you through really what happened. Again, we're below median snow water equivalent. Things are pretty dry around the Northern Mountains. We're at low danger at the end of the month, just because of the lack of snow in most areas. So although you could trigger avalanches, most of them weren't very big. Maybe you were triggering some facet sloughs, but we didn't have much of a slab on top of our snowpack, and so we weren't seeing very large avalanches. These are the avalanches in November. So you can see everything's really confined to northerly and easterly facing aspects. We don't have very many destructive size 2 avalanches. There's only a handful of them. Most of them are small avalanches, not large enough to bury a person. And we only have 24 of them through that period. And then what happens in December is we start to pick up some snow. So you can see we've had a couple of storms here. There's a storm in the beginning of December. We have some more dry periods. And then we have this ramp up here through the Christmas period and into the first of the year. So you can see a really big change in avalanche activity here in the month of December. For one, we have avalanches on a lot of aspects, but you can still see that northerly and easterly facing aspects, kind of this upper corner right here, north, northeast, and east, is really where things are really kicking off. These are our biggest avalanches. They're breaking to the ground. They're pretty deep, but you can see over here that we're getting more destructive size 2 avalanches and even some destructive size 2.5 avalanches. So that's the whole month of December. There's 199 avalanches reported. And then we have this period from just before Christmas to New Year's Day, where we see this pretty big storm event right here. So this one right in here. And the Tower Snowtail in the Steamboat Zone gets over 38 inches of snow. Cameron Pass, again in the Northern Front Range, picks up about 24. Berthoud Pass, 27. Eisenhower Tunnel, 17. 19 at Loveland, and another 27 at Val Pass. So quite a big storm for the Northern Mountains, and it's landing on a really weak and shallow snowpack. And what you would expect to happen happened, right? So 199 total avalanches in the month of December, and 136 of those avalanches were in about the last week of December in the Northern Mountains. Again, you can see the bigger avalanches here are really on the northerly and easterly facing slopes. Things are really concentrated to this area where that early season snow stuck around on high elevation slopes, and we started to see some really big avalanches there. As Ethan said, on December 24th, we had a fatal avalanche accident in the Diamond Peaks on Cameron Pass. So the skier entered here where this arrow is on the left side of the screen and was buried down here. Not a very big avalanche like Ethan said, but it did break into the depth hoar layers, and it did pile up pretty deeply down here in the run out zone where he was buried. In that same period, we really started to see these bigger avalanches breaking to the ground. So these are in the Front Range zone. You can see these crowns are 4 to 6 feet tall, and they're taking out whole portions of slopes here. So really an increase in avalanche activity. Some bigger crowns, even near and below tree line. You can see it's breaking kind of at the top of this weak depth hoar down here. You can see the line pretty clearly. This is a snowcat triggered avalanche in the Front Range zone at the Fraser Experimental Station. Again, pretty wide reaching avalanche, broke up into the trees and piled up quite a substantial amount of debris down there. So we have this dry period here in the beginning of January, and then we get this really massive storm event, the same one that went through the Central Mountains at the beginning of January, about January 1st through January 6th. So on those 2 days, the 5th and the 6th, the biggest snow days, the Tower Station in the Steamboat and Flat Top Zone, which is by far the snowiest place in the Northern Mountains, had its highest 2-day gain of snow water equivalent since 1970. So in those 48 hours, so actually 2 calendar days, they almost picked up 7 inches of snow water equivalent, which is probably 70 inches of snow. It's quite a substantial amount of snow for 2 days. Cameron Pass picked up 25 inches, 19 for most of the rest of the Northern Mountains, and Vail Pass picked up 17. And again, just in those 2 days, avalanches grew in size, mostly breaking on the basal facets, so just a big enough load to really get things going. You can see this avalanche starts somewhere over here and breaks out across the whole peak and runs out way down into here. Here's looking up at some avalanches, big crown lines, breaking on these shallow areas by the rocks. You can see this very clearly in this picture to the right over here, where the trigger points are running through the shallow areas on the depth hoar. And so during this time period, this is really what we're warning people about in the Northern Mountains, is paying attention to these shallower snowpack areas. So places less than about 4 feet deep, where you can affect these buried weak layers and bring down massive avalanches. This is outside of the town of Montezuma, and you can see about 3 different large avalanches in here. There's one here, one in this feature here, and then one off of this face here that all occurred during that period. And they're all breaking in the basal facets. So very big load on a very weak snowpack. As we come closer to the present day, we see this again, fairly big dry period here through most of January up until today. So what's been happening recently, at least up until the last couple of days, is we are starting to facet the snowpack. We're starting to facet the snow surface, especially, and we're seeing a big weakening of the surface snow. Those basal facets are still there, but we're seeing a weakening of the surface snow. Here's just a quick graphic to show you the storm periods that we saw. So here's the Christmas storm period. Things mellowed out. We got some more snow during this period. Again, things mellowed out, and then a really massive spike here, the January 6th, 7th, and 8th. And then we came into this period where we weren't seeing very much avalanche activity through the beginning of January. And then the last couple of days, we have an increase in avalanche activity again in the northern mountains. This plot is looking at snow pack tests. So the green means that it's pretty solid. The red means that it's not as solid. The X's here mean that snowpack tests aren't propagating. The P's mean that snowpack tests are propagating. And so this is from the last week about. And so what we're seeing across the northern mountains is we're not seeing propagation in a lot of our snowpack tests. And so about 4 days ago, we were at low danger across most of the northern mountains. But the recent storms over the past couple of days have bumped up the danger a little bit. You can see some of these more shallow areas down here that we're still getting propagation in snowpack tests even over the last week. So here's what the snowpack currently looks like in a bunch of different areas in the northern mountains. This is from Rocky Mountain National Park. This is a deeper area. You can see there's 200 centimeters of snow here. And they didn't even bother digging down to the ground because this snowpack is so strong and hard up here. You can't even affect these buried weak layers in the deeper areas. So that's about Rocky Mountain National Park, north through a good bit of the area around Cameron Pass, the Never Summers into the Steamboat and Flat Top zone. We have a pretty solid, stable snowpack. There are plenty of areas where the snowpack is more shallow. So you can see this one's about 140 centimeters deep. And you can see a couple of things in here. In the bottom, you can see this faceted layer, and these basal facets are still fairly weak, although they are gaining strength. You can see a mid-pack slab in here with some rounded crystals, but then pay attention here to the top about 20 centimeters where you have kind of these broken grains, possibly even some surface ore, and then new snow on here. So these layers right here are the ones that are going to start to be a problem. And if we trigger avalanches eventually, if we get a slab and trigger avalanches on here, this snowpack in a lot of places still isn't deep enough is shallow enough, I should say, that we can still affect these basal facets. And that area is about south of Rocky Mountain National Park through kind of the southern portion of the Vail and Summit County zone, southern and central portion, where we might have avalanches stepping to the ground. So here's the danger as of today. Again, the Steamboat and Flat Top zone is very deep, very strong, and it's probably going to stay at low danger for quite a while, except for when we get new snow problems. So if we get a storm, expect to see a quick bump in the avalanche danger, but it's mostly going to be new snow problems. So either wind slabs or storm slabs. They'll last for a little while and they'll go away. But we aren't going to see stuff, most likely aren't going to see stuff breaking into the basal facets there. In the Vail and Summit County and Front Range zones, we've received a couple of storms over the last about 3 days. And we've picked up anywhere from probably 3 to 8 inches of snow in some of those areas, especially the eastern part of the Front Range zone. So that combined with winds has caused some problems in the Front Range zone currently. And they're the only 2 zones that are at moderate danger today. And they look like they'll stay there for a couple of days. So you can see Two things here. You can see the basal facets, the persistent weak layers here in the Front Range and the Vail and Summit County zone are still on the problem list. They're gonna last for a while. And the areas we're most concerned about for this problem, the persistent slab avalanche problem, are places that are more shallow than about 5 or 6 feet. So places where you can still affect the buried weak layers. Again, it's mostly north, northeast, east facing aspects and some southeast facing aspects in the Vail and Summit County zone. The wind slab problem, which is a couple of days old, is mostly on easterly facing aspects in the Front Range. And then you'll see a little bit on west and northwest here from a little bit of an upslope event that we had, not this storm, but the previous storm. So these wind slabs are breaking, oops, have some pictures. These wind slabs are breaking in the surface snow, and they aren't entraining too much snow. They're not that big right now. They mostly look like this. So you can see there's a couple of inches of wind stiffened snow here that's breaking on the new snow, old snow surface. And they're not massive. They're fairly small avalanches and pretty easy to find. So if you're finding these little bit stiffer layers, especially on rollovers, you should pay attention to wind slabs right now in those areas. We have seen a couple of larger avalanches here in the last 7 days in the Front Range zone. This one is on Cameron Pass, and you can see it broke a little bit deeper. It's most likely a wind-loaded feature here that, again, is breaking on those closer to the surface persistent weak layers. And you can see the same here. This is most likely a wind-loaded feature. It didn't break the whole way up into this bowl. The other things you can see is that the snowpack is pretty shallow in a lot of places in the northern mountains. There's a lot of area above tree line that's been blown free of snow, which means that there's shallow areas here along these rocks, and those are places that you should really be careful about here going into the future. So here's 2 snow pits showing really well portraying the current problem. In this one on the left, you can see here at the surface, there's a bunch of these square near surface faceted crystals. You can find them almost anywhere in the northern mountains right now if you go out. This is a pretty thick layer of near surface facets. It's not a problem right now, except in wind drifted areas where there's a slab on top of them. But this is gonna be a problem for us going into the future. So in the deeper snowpack areas, things most likely won't break in the basal facets, but they're gonna start here in this near surface faceted layer at the new snow, old snow interface. In the shallower areas where there's less than 4 feet of snow, again, there's a lot of faceted crystals here in the top of the snowpack. And if you trigger an avalanche here in these faceted crystals in the top in the more shallow areas, it can really easily step down into these basal faceted crystals. And these avalanches are going to be large, destructive size 2.5, 3, so large enough to bury a car, easily large enough to bury a person. And so this is really the layer that we're worried about, this stuff in the surface. You can see here at this 80 centimeter mark here, this weakest area that's with this red highlight in this circle is a layer of near surface faceted crystals that's around a crust. So on southerly, southeasterly, and east facing aspects, a lot of slopes have this crust. This layer right here underneath of these near surface faceted crystals is very weak, and it's going to be very problematic going into the future here in the northern mountains. I don't see the persistent problems coming off of the problem list, but what's going to happen until we build a slab on top of these near surface weak layers is we're going to go through periods where we're having problems with wind drifted snow, but things aren't stepping down. And the danger is going to go up to moderate and back down and up to moderate and back down. Once we get enough load on here, we're going to see moderate to considerable danger lasting for quite a while, with some big concerns again of stuff stepping down to the ground. So here's a little outlook of what's next. See if this plays. So you can see this is January 27th. So you can see there's an exiting system. And then we have high pressure building in here towards the 27th and 28th. We have this closed low pressure system that's going to sweep across underneath of us. Not too much is going on in January until this deeper trough here comes in and sweeps across the area in the beginning of February. It's not a massive trough. You can see it's positively tilted. It's leaned northeast to southwest, which doesn't usually bode well for snowfall. And here's what's going to happen with the snowfall, at least on the medium range models right now, the way they look. So we'll get a little bit of snow here at the end of January, but it's not going to amount to very much, 2 to 3 inches across the state. And then we have this high pressure period where we have ridging off to our west. Again, not much is happening. We have a quick shot on January 30th, 31st-ish. And then again, not much happens here until around February 2nd or 3rd, when that trough comes through and we start to get a little bit deeper snow. This is a little ways out for models, as far as models go, but it does look like there's not a lot coming until around that February 3rd period. And so with that, I will turn it back over to Aaron. Thanks everybody for listening. We appreciate it. And I think we'll open it up to questions.
Thanks, Coop. Thanks, everyone. We're happy to take any questions. If you guys do have questions, feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we can either unmute you or ask the questions directly. I do have a question, and I think it's probably mostly for Brian Lazar. So Brian, it seems that according to my social media feed, it's totally open season in the Central Mountains. So what should people be prepared for once we do start getting snow?
Yeah, I mean, I really am reluctant. I'm an avalanche forecaster and public safety guy, but it is like open season over almost all of the Central Mountains. So the only things I'm really worried about right now are people are really pushing into essentially spring lines, so super steep stuff. And we've seen this happen before. We often don't get our hackles up for size 1 sloughs, but this kind of stuff people are pushing into now. I just want people to really consider the consequences of pushing into steep terrain and consider what a really small avalanche knocks you off your feet is going to do. As Ben's video illustrated, we have these few areas of shallow snowpack in the Central Mountains that you could still get something to break on the basal facets. And then if those things propagate into the deeper weak layers, the slab is really strong and really dense. And so it's going to bring down a tremendous volume of snow. So it is a very low probability, high consequence type of situation, but only in those isolated areas like right near Independence Pass, some of the shallow spots on the eastern side of the Saguache Range. But other than that, it's a great time to get out there. Like there's all these kinds of lines and riding conditions that are just not usually in shape. And I can't tell you how often I've been asked like when a January looked like this. And I can't remember one where we had this much snow on the ground. So even those low elevation, timbered entrances and exits, which are usually just penalty fees, are pretty well covered. And you've got good stability. I can't remember this setup. I can't remember a setup like this in the middle of January, going back 20 years in my career. So it's great. So the whole thing right now is just monitoring surface conditions. And so current surface conditions is we are in training enough loose snow on the surface now to be worried about facet sloughs. So you got to really consider the consequences of getting knocked off your feet if you're pushing into steeper terrain. And then once we build a slab on top of this surface snow, we are going to see a massive avalanche cycle. It's like almost guaranteed. And we're getting dribs and drabs of snow through the end of the month. That doesn't look like it's going to do it, but we do get a shift in the weather pattern in early February to something more progressive. And if we start building slabs, they don't have to be that stiff. I'm talking like 4-finger hardness, hand hardness. We're going to see avalanches that are going to break pretty big, and they may only break down on the current snow surface, but this current snow surface is super weak right now. So it's either crust facet combinations or just facets all by itself. So I'm just looking for the next new snow load. And until then, I'm just doing like kind of essentially slough management and really considering the consequences of getting knocked off my feet in really steep terrain.
Awesome. Sounds like I should stop working for a week.
Everyone should right now.
Right. There was another question that we had: no problems in the avalanche forecast. How do we approach that? If there's low danger and no problems, that's the question. How do we approach that?
Well, I'll let these guys chime in, but we don't have, I think, any problems listed in the Central Mountains anymore for the reasons I just explained. So the way to approach it is just like, you can't turn off your brain. You can't be like, oh, those guys said it was low, I can do anything I want. Just consider the consequences of really small slides. That's all we've seen. But really small slides have killed people, and we've seen it recently. We've seen people washed out of couloirs in the Gore Range. And so that's the kind of thing I'm worried about in most of the Central Mountains right now. And I'll let Bex and Coop kind of speak for what's going on in their regions. But
yeah, I think one thing you have to pay attention to and really remember is what we're doing, right? We're not forecasting for the slope scale. We're forecasting for pretty broad areas. And so even if there's no problems on the problem list, it's pretty hard for us to get there, and we feel pretty confident in those areas. But you still need to assess all the slopes carefully before you go and ride. And especially if you're in these thinner areas, the eastern parts of the Central Mountains, the kind of southern parts of the south and central parts of the Front Range, and eastern parts of the Southern Mountains. In the Steamboat and Flat Top zone, again, there's no problems there on the problem rows. It's very deep, it's very solid. And the only stuff that's really going to come on there in the near term are new snow problems. So storm slabs or wind slabs based off of whatever storms happen. In the Front Range and Vail and Summit County zones, the persistent slab avalanche problem isn't going to go away on north, northeast, and east facing aspects, especially. And as soon as we get a bigger load, I would expect the persistent slab avalanche problem actually to expand around the rows more towards southeast and maybe even south in some spots because of the surface snow is so weak. So yeah, I think in Vail and Summit County are probably the most likely places around the state right now to trigger avalanches.
Southern Mountains are in the same boat. Like, again, we're not slope scale forecasting. The winds do funky things in the mountains. Pay attention and travel and keep your eyes open. Situational awareness, head on a swivel. And then pay attention to what you're traveling over. If there are places that you like to go to often, like think ahead, we're looking at some snow starting next week, what's getting buried, just what we were talking about, like what are your surface conditions. But yeah, I mean, it's a good time to get out, but you can get up high and the skiing's just not that great. Or travel isn't that great, not just skiing. Skiing, riding, snowmobiling, not awesome.
Still selling it, Bex.
Thanks. Trying to keep him run away. No, I'm kidding.
Right.
that's how Bex keeps folks out of her stashes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions coming in. I want to thank you guys so much for your time this evening. Thank you to everyone that attended tonight's event. It is recorded and we will send it out to the list. So if you want to send it to your friends or other folks that you think should be members of Friends of CAIC, please do that. So thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.